Marjorie Taylor Greene, long seen as a conservative stronghold, kind of founder spurring on the Freedom Caucus for so long, and yet in an unprecedented move is aligning with some of the more progressive Democrats on a number of issues, including but not limited to immigration, Palestine, and of course the most recent government shutdown. Aaron, you got the story. Why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Marjorie Taylor Greene is finding common ground with the left. We had her on Anna Kasparian, the Young Turks, which is known as a very progressive podcast, and they found common ground on the role of Israel in U.S. foreign policy. And this gives me a lot of hope because something that we have always wanted and contended for is unity. I mean, this country cannot survive if we cannot find common ground on something. Liberals and conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, independents have to share the same country. And I think what's happening right now is the left-right paradigm is getting shattered. And I think we're starting to see who controls the strings. And I think we're starting to identify the puppet master. And let me just get into it. You had Anna Kasparian, a very progressive podcast host, come out and become very critical of AIPAC, and which is the Israeli lobbying arm in the United States that has, or is arguably the most powerful lobby group in the United States. I think that they spend more money on lobbying Congress than any lobbying special interest group in Washington. I call it the K Street Mafia. And AIPAC sits at the very top of that pyramid as the king. And Anna Kasparian has been very critical of that, as Marjorie Taylor Greene has. And that gives me goosebumps because if we can come together on this one issue, on Israel specifically, I believe we have a unique opportunity to get back this country. In other words, I would reach my hand across the aisle, the proverbial aisle, and tell leftists, let's put our differences aside on identity politics. Let's put our differences aside on the issue of abortion, whatever differences, all the differences that we have, and let's just dial in and stay super focused on this one issue, which is Israel. So in July of 2025, Marjorie Taylor Greene introduced an amendment to the 2026 Department of Defense Appropriations Bill to cut $500 million in military aid to Israel. The amendment was overwhelmingly rejected by the House of Representatives, but what I thought was very interesting is that it earned the vote of course, my boy, Thomas Massie, but progressive Democrats Al Green, Summer Lee, Ilhan Omar, Jason's favorite, and Rashida Tlaib. And I don't know, Jason, you follow politics more than I do. Can you recall in recent history a bill that was brought to the House floor where you had people like Thomas Massie and MTG voting with Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib?
I mean, there were several bills that passed with almost unanimous.
Well,
but
votes. Yes.
Yeah, the most recent one was actually to make sure that police officers were given their benefits if they were killed off duty, or if a retired police officer was killed off duty, but it was in retaliation of something that would happen while they were on duty. And that goes back to a man who was a retired police officer who was shot in his front yard by somebody that he had arrested 10 years prior. And so both the Republicans and Democrats came together to ensure that those that serve this country and serve our communities are protected if they are killed, even off duty, because of something that happened while they were in the line of duty. There's very few times when you get issues that are very controversial where you have parties crossing aisles. And I think that this is a broader message in terms of what voters and the American public are looking to accomplish. And I bring this up because if you look at Trump's election and Trump's win, Trump flipped the Hispanic male vote by 18 points. And this is along the same lines as the time when Trump was very hard on illegal immigration. And yet he flipped the Hispanic male vote in his favor and moved to 18 points. And so it's not uncommon to see that the American people just want issues solved. and they're going to look towards the party that's most likely to do it. Just yesterday, one of the massive tech mogul billionaires who voted for Kamala Harris, who voted for Obama, just changed her party registration to Republican. So I think that party identity aside, I think that the American people are looking at each issue and going, okay, the issue that matters to me most is blank, and the people that are most likely to fight for that issue are blank, and that's who I'm going to vote for. I do think that ticket splitting is a very small percentage of the minority right now. I don't think that there's a whole lot of Americans that ticket split. What I mean by that is if they're going down the ballot, they're marking all Republicans or all Democrats. They're not marking some Republicans and some Democrats. But I think that that might change in the upcoming elections. I think that you might see if Marjorie Taylor Greene were to run against Vance in the Republican primary and win, I think you may see a lot of independents and a lot of Democrats, especially after what's taken place this last couple weeks, casting their vote for Marjorie Taylor Greene that wouldn't typically do so, just like you saw the Hispanic male vote switch. Now, I do think that there was quite a bit of ticket splitting when it came to the presidential campaign.
Ticket splitting? Is that like ticket scalping on Ticketmaster?
No, it's where you are voting some Republicans, some Democrats. You're not voting a straight Republican ballot or a straight Democrat ballot.
I was like selling like Paul McCartney tickets on Facebook or something.
And we know that that happened in the last presidential election. There was people that voted for Donald Trump that then voted Democrat down the rest of the ballot. And it happened more frequently than I think it probably ever has. And we don't have that exact data on the show right now, but we could probably find that if we were to go to each state and find the Secretary of State's information, we could see how many ballots were cast that had ticket splitting involved. But it is a small minority that is growing, I believe, but it's still a small minority.
Well, I think it's important to put Marjorie Taylor Greene's position into context. She has been arguing that the U.S. national debt is $37 trillion, that we can no longer afford such foreign aid. And I think, like to your point earlier, Americans just want problems fixed. The military's not. I was in the sauna this morning, and these military guys are saying this is the first time that they're going to not get a paycheck, and there's concern. We live in Colorado Springs. It's major military community. The vibe is in the air, and I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people, government workers, military, are saying, why is it that I'm not getting a check, but yet we're still going to earmark $500 million for Israel's nuclear program? It's just, I don't see you looking into the eyes of a army dad and saying, you're going to have to put your kids on a diet this week because we need to give Benji Netanyahu, $500 million, which Green mentioned. Israel's annual foreign aid budget in foreign assistance is $3.8 billion, not including an additional $8.7 billion from supplemental security package. So this is untenable. Like, why are we giving them this money?
So I just want to be really clear. At the present moment, as of today, no military member has missed a paycheck. So the paychecks were covered up until this point. The next payroll cycle, if the government does not pass some sort of measure to ensure that the military gets paid, they will miss a paycheck. And there's been several short-term or short-fix bills to try to fund just the military that have been shot down in Congress. But with that being said, there's still that $37 trillion that we keep electing people that go, we're going to balance a budget, and yet it's not really happening, and it's not necessarily 100% on the president. It's on Congress. Yeah. It's on Congress to pass these budgets. They are the purse string. They are the holder of the U.S. spending. And so, there is some arguments to this government shutdown that make a whole lot of sense when it comes to we need to solve this crisis that we still haven't solved in, the last 60, 70 years of these consistent campaign promises of we're going to solve this national debt crisis, which at this point is almost impossible to solve.
Yeah. And in addition to the fiscal irresponsibility argument, which is in summation, why are we giving Israel $3.8 billion when we're shutting down our government? There's an agreement with the left on Gaza. Anna Kasparian, I'll use her as an example because she's probably one of the most prominent vocal progressives, if you will, on the podcast universe, clearly calling this a genocide. Marjorie Taylor Greene is calling this a genocide. Go watch the Marjorie Taylor Greene interview with Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian on the Young Turks. It will give you hope. It gave me hope. It gave me chills because, call me idealistic, but I believe America could unite again.
So I'm running into more and more Republicans that are ditching their Zionistic viewpoints, ditching their unhindered support for Israel. I think that Tucker Carlson interview with Ted Cruz was a massive turning point in the MAGA base. And we talked before the show, and I said, I think that when it comes to the MAGA base, we've seen the MAGA base not blindly following Trump just all the time. And one of those issues is on Gaza and Palestine. The other one is on things like immigration, issues with the Epstein client list or Epstein case. We've seen the MAGA base consistently, blow the whistle and say, hey, we elected you to be very transparent, and we're not getting that level of transparency. We elected you to make sure that you put America first, and if we're continually giving money to Israel, are we putting America first? And that's a question that a lot of Republicans are asking.
And Christians are asking, why is Israel bombing a Catholic church in Gaza? Why are Orthodox Christian churches being targeted by the IDF? And what's interesting, the old argument used to be, well, Hamas is hiding in these places. I have yet to hear that they're even presenting that as a defense. I'm not even sure what the justification the IDF has presented. I maybe didn't do my homework enough, but I don't care, because you don't bomb old ladies in churches that have been standing there for hundreds, maybe even longer. This is incredibly concerning for devout Christians and Catholics in the United States. Why are taxpayer dollars being used to bomb Christians in churches? It doesn't make any sense. In addition to that, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of expanding on this, referring to this crisis as a genocide, but that didn't go too well with AIPAC, because AIPAC immediately put her in their crosshairs and started to question her values, whether she had the right American values, and I just think that AIPAC showing their cards when they go after her. In addition to that, she said on X in July 2025, just as I can unequivocally say that what has been happening to innocent people and children in Gaza is horrific. Criticism of the Gaza bombing. After the bombing of the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza, Greene stated that Israel bombed the Catholic Church in Gaza, and that entire population is being wiped out as they continue their aggressive war in Gaza. These sentiments were expressed in the Anna Kasparian interview, and the exchange was beautiful. Anna was like, I couldn't agree more. And Anna, kind of fed it back to Marjorie and told her, I hope that we can continue to find common ground together. Marjorie Taylor Greene returned the same sentiment and says, I do as well. I just saw that as a beautiful moment, because if we can agree on something with the left, because God blesses unity. I mean, that's a spiritual principle. A house divided will fall, but one that's united will stand. And so as a country, if we can be united, especially on something as righteous as defending innocent life, God may have mercy on our nation.
I understand where you're coming from, and I love to see that there's an element of some form of search for unity, but I do not have faith that the progressive left will seek unity on other issues, that the progressive left will seek unity or find some sort of common ground on the pro-life issue.
Okay.
I don't think that the left will ever seek ground or find common ground on the LGBTQ issue. And so while I do agree with you on this particular topic, I think that to get too excited is going to be very short-sighted. But when it comes to how we manage the illegal alien immigration issue, when it comes to how we manage the budgetary issues, when it comes to how we manage foreign interventionism, the common ground is definitely a step in the right direction. But the issues that I think are impacting the church by and large and impacting Christians across this country, such as their freedom to practice their religion how they see fit, that is continually being attacked and undermined by the progressive left.
Yeah, I mean, I get all that, and I know that there's probably going to be a lot we can disagree on, but I just think once in this moment in time, in this moment in history, let's just hang our hat on this issue. And let's dial in and let's focus. And the reason I want to dial in and focus on this is because what I said earlier, I believe that AIPAC holds undue power in this country. MTG echoed that by saying, in response to AIPAC's criticism when they were saying she was betraying American values and, quote, spouting the same vile rhetoric as anti-Israel figures, she responded by saying, bring it on, and escalated her criticism, as MTG likes to do, right? She always takes it up a couple notches once she gets attacked, and suggests that AIPAC and other lobbyists for foreign countries should be investigated under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, also known as FARA. And she's been quoted on record as saying, quote, 1,000,000% serving and lobbying for a foreign country, Israel, referring to lobbying for a foreign country, and has added that she is as American as they come. And just so you guys know, FARA's purpose is to require individuals and organizations to register with the U.S. Department of Justice if they engage in political activities or lobbying on behalf of a foreign interest. Now, I remember somebody that also wanted Israel to register under the FARA Act. His name was John F. Kennedy. Now, I don't know if it's connected, but shortly after he made that announcement, they blew his head off on live television in downtown Dallas, Texas. So I don't know if there's a connection between AIPAC and Kennedy's assassination, but it's beginning to look like AIPAC does not want the United States to stop their unadulterated support of the nation state of Israel. And it also must be said, we're always accused of being, quote unquote, anti-Semitic. This is not an argument against a religion or an ethnic group or a people. This is an argument against the Likud party led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a self-avowed Zionist, who many in his own countries who are Jewish, practicing Jews, do not want him in power, do not want the occupation of the Gaza Strip, do not want to continue this Greater Israel plan. They're not approving of this foreign policy. So this is not us hating Jewish people. I don't hate America because I'm critical of Joe Biden. I'm critical of Joe Biden because I love America, and I don't think he's serving America's interests. And I also join the Jewish people and the Israeli citizens who are also equally as I am, and many here in the United States, progressives and conservatives, very critical of Israel's undue influence in our political system. It doesn't make any sense. I agree with John F. Kennedy. I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene. If you're going to lobby our country on behalf of a foreign nation, follow the law. Why is it that this country just seems to be the only nation on the planet that doesn't have to follow the rules?
Well, not only the intervention in our politics, but the intervention in the church, right? In the Christian church. Because the Great Commission that Jesus left us with was go and share the gospel to all nations. He did not say go and share the gospel to all nations except Israel. Go and share the gospel to all peoples except the Jewish people. There was not anywhere in the Great Commission, and yet the church's viewpoint in the United States is almost as if it's go and share the gospel to everybody except the Jews, because the Jews are still God's chosen people and they don't need the gospel, which is not biblical in any way, shape, or form. But we celebrate, and I have friends that have put together prayer guides for Muslims and all sorts of other religion groups, and there's constant talk about, hey, this Muslim converted to Christianity, but there's not the same type of promotion when a Jew comes to Christ. When a Jewish individual comes to Christ, we don't celebrate it in the same way. It's not advertised. We don't have prayer guides that the Jewish people will find Jesus. Like the church has left the Jewish people alone, and that's not the call of Christ. And so I just have this question of whether or not this Zionistic viewpoint that the American church has held for so long, that has basically said, you know what, the Jewish people don't need Jesus, is essentially what they're saying, is right in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think that you could back that up biblically at all. I think that God's will for the Jewish people was to accept Christ and accept Christ as God in flesh and as the Messiah that is promised all throughout the Old Testament and the Old Testament scripture that the Jewish people believe.
Exactly. And it's also worth noting that the modern version of Judaism is derived from the Talmudic tradition. And the Talmudic tradition historically did not begin till after the resurrection of Jesus. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that modern Judaism is not the predecessor of Christianity. It is a response to Christianity. And I would encourage everybody to look that up, because I think it's due time for the Christian church to know their history and to understand where we came from so that we know where we're going. Those that don't understand the mistakes of the past will repeat them in the future. The Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. So if we're going to navigate this very, very delicate time in history, we must understand the history. And so I want to move to Marjorie Taylor Greene's criticism of the ICE raids, because I also, too, am very, very pro strong immigration, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I recently found myself in a minority of conservatives who were not jumping up and down watching, flash grenades in Los Angeles and Chicago and seeing these roundups of so-called illegals. Now let's get into what MTG's critical of. Greene believes immigration enforcement must be strategic and not involve simply, quote, rounding up every single person. And in a podcast appearance in October 25, she voiced her support for a secure border, but insisted on a smarter plan for deportation. She pointed out that many industries, including construction, rely on immigrant labor, indicating her pragmatic view on enforcement. And if you remember a couple of shows ago, you guys asked me, well, what are we going to do? Like, we got all, my dad asked me this question because he's kind of very MAGA. Let's round them up. Let's get them out of here. I'm all for these raids. I said, do you realize that a lot of the people that are getting caught up in these raids are U.S. citizens? Do you realize that we're setting a precedent? We're conditioning the American people to have federal agents go into communities and round people up in broad daylight. I just don't think that reflects the tradition of who we are as a nation. And then so my dad, and I'm sure many conservatives and MAGA supporters would then respond, well, so then how do you expect to do it? And Marjorie Taylor Greene actually answers that question. She says it's definitely not with large scale raids. But what it does look like is ending sanctuary cities, advocating for stricter border security that hasn't been established, like in the Special Interest Alien Reporting Act, to track individuals from certain countries entering the U.S. But I don't recall MTG seeing this, but I believe, and I remember this argument in the 90s when we were talking about immigration, we go after the employers. We disincentivize people to have illegals. We actually enforce labor laws. Like every time an American citizen applies for a job, they have to submit their social security to verify that they're legally able to work in this country. Those laws are already in place, and that's where we can begin this conversation, not these viral YouTube videos of people getting rounded up in mass and flash grenades on La Brea Avenue in Los Angeles.
I think that a lot of this is due to short-sighted political pressure. And I say it that way because you put in place a Republican-controlled House, a Republican-controlled Senate, and a Republican-controlled presidency. And 2 years later, you have a midterm election. And in order to ensure that you don't lose a ton of seats, the American people want results, and they want to see results. And so what we have is this really short-sighted fast action in order to attempt to influence the midterm elections. And I think that's why we see the really heavy hand of ICE and the really heavy hand of immigration in order to make sure that, number one, the money keeps flowing into these campaigns, but number two, that Republican voters show up to vote and don't sit home because they're like, you know what, I voted and nothing got done. What's the point of voting again? And so I think that's why we see so much of heavy-handedness and this short-sightedness. But at the same time, I think that we don't necessarily always get all the information when it comes to some of these raids. I think some of them are necessary. I go back to the one that happened in Colorado Springs with the illegal nightclub, where they ended up arresting several illegal immigrants. There were some American citizens that were caught up in that, but then again, there was the transactions of guns to illegals. There was pink cocaine and drugs everywhere in that club. There was the potential for what they believe was human trafficking. I don't know if that was confirmed, but there was underage girls in that nightclub, and so.
So contrary to Usher's song, "There's Love in the Club," there wasn't love in the club.
No, probably not. Not consensual love. Let's put it that way. So with some of these raids, they're probably highly necessary in terms of like, let's get the highly illegal criminals off the street. And I think when we see some of these raids that are going on, number one, I don't think that they are unplanned. I know that the one in Colorado Springs had been planned for quite a while. They had worked with local law enforcement in order to get that done. But sure, there are some cases where maybe it's taken too far, or American citizens that are living their everyday lives are caught up in this. And yeah, it's definitely it's a balancing act of, okay, how do we make sure that we are protecting the constitutional rights of American citizens at the same time as trying to solve this massive immigration crisis that the Democrats perpetuated for so long.
So do you agree that Marjorie Taylor Greene has an argument that there's a contingent of conservatives and former Trump supporters, or maybe current Trump supporters, that are critical of the way that these roundups are taking place? Or do you at least empathize with their point, and maybe disagree but empathize?
I understand that in some of these cases that maybe they weren't handled the best way, and I can agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene in that respect, that hey, not all the time are they acceptable, right? It goes back to kind of that no-knock warrant argument that took place a number of years ago after what's her name got shot. Sorry for not having that information top of my head, but it started this national conversation on whether or not no-knock warrants were quality, right? Like whether or not we should be using no-knock warrants, that whether or not police should just bust into a house in order to make an arrest, most of the time because they fear for the safety of the officers if they were to knock.
2011, she was shot in the head during a Congress on your corner constituent meeting in Tucson, Arizona?
No, it was the one where the no-knock warrant took place in an apartment complex, and the bullet went through a wall and hit her.
Oh, okay. Gabby Giffords? Or never mind. It's no-knock warrant. But was this a congressperson being shot?
No.
Oh, it was just... No. Okay, sorry.
No, it was a no-knock warrant of arrest, and a bystander was killed because a bullet traveled through a wall. But it goes back to this. I was a bondsman for a short time, and you approach houses in the middle of the night looking for people, right? And these are highly dangerous criminals.
Breonna Taylor.
And yes, Breonna Taylor. And you knock on these doors, and you don't know what's going to come out.
Florida man might be on the side of the door, bro.
At the other side of that door. And so it does put you in a situation where it is not necessarily a safe situation. And so, this idea of like, well, we should just get rid of no-knock warrants. We're talking about people that have access to guns and weapons that can shoot through doors at officers. And so you announce the presence of officers, and all of a sudden you put that officer's life at risk that's trying to serve the public. And sure, in some situations, it might not be the most ideal idea to use a no-knock warrant, and there might be some repercussions to it. Just like when you talk about some of these ICE raids and the way that they're carrying them out, a lot of times they're carrying them out in the way that they're carrying them out for the officer's safety. And I think that is a component that has to be talked about. And we still have to ensure that these ICE agents are protected. And so I get both sides of the argument, and I'm not fully on Marjorie Taylor Greene's side because there's so much that we have to discuss when it comes to these ICE raids and what's taking place across the country.
Yeah, I think so. Can you have federal pressure? Can the federal government exact consequences on U.S. cities for being sanctuary cities because they're essentially conflicting and violating federal law?
Yes.
What would that look like?
So I think that the president and Congress has numerous options as to how they choose to punish quote unquote sanctuary states or sanctuary cities. Um, in general, the way that law works is there's a hierarchy of law. So federal law trumps state law, would trump state law trumps municipal law. Municipalities can be more aggressive in their laws, but not less aggressive in their laws than the state. And the state can be more aggressive than the federal government, but not less aggressive than the federal government. And so when the federal law is that of you must be a United States citizen or presently going through the process, you have to have a legal right to be present in the United States. And the state goes, we're going to ignore that. The state has no right to ignore the federal government. If the state is upset with the way that the federal government has made law, they need to go through the proper channels, which is the court system, to address the law which they are claiming is unconstitutional or overreaching. And so they would have to take it to the Supreme Court to make that ruling. These states and these municipalities chose not to do that and instead decided to harbor illegal aliens and criminals in this country. And so, yes, the federal government has every right to take action against these states and against these cities. The first action that the current administration has taken is to do so in a financial manner. And so they're restricting federal funds to these states, okay, which is putting them into a budget crisis. They're restricting grant money to some of these individuals, some of these places, some of these organizations. And so the first course of action that the federal government has is they're going to do so in a way that restricts funding. They're going to control the purse strings. They're going to control the money that's going into these states because the states have to follow federal law. Right. That's a requirement. And if they don't like federal law, they should go challenge it. Now, if that is not enough, which we're seeing in many cities, that's not enough. Right. I believe that the federal government has the ability to send in ICE on its own without the cooperation of that local municipality or the local state. And that's what's happening. And if these cities don't like the way that it's being handled, you have to look back at these police chiefs, these sheriff's departments, state law enforcement, and their refusal to work with ICE, because this would go a different way if there was coordination between local municipalities and ICE. It would go a different way if there was coordination between the state and ICE. But we're sitting here in the state of Colorado where basically it is a crime for police officers to report an illegal to ICE. They've made that against the law in the state of Colorado. It's not a legal law. In fact, it's an illegal law because it goes against what federal law is. That's being challenged right now through the court system. But if there's no coordination and ICE has to do this all by themselves and federal enforcement has to do this all by themselves without the coordination of local municipalities, then it's really hard for those states and those cities to go back and be like, we're going to blow the whistle on what you're doing because you refuse to coordinate with them to begin with. You refuse to protect the federal law enforcement, work with the federal law enforcement to do the job.
And Google's telling me that there are legal cures for municipalities disobeying federal immigration law, including federal lawsuits under the Supremacy Clause and the possibility of a U.S. Attorney General intervening and potentially levying criminal prosecution for officials who obstruct federal enforcement. So if I'm reading in between the lines, could an Attorney General basically give a mayor an ultimatum and saying either you get in line and cut out the crap or we're going to come and put you in handcuffs?
I believe that they could.
That's gangster, bro.
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the sheriff could arrest the mayor. Yeah. I mean, all it takes is to put a few good men in places of authority in these cities. You don't need to fully control them. You just need a few good men
that are going to stand up.
We're Sheriff
Arpaio when you need them, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the famous sheriff from Arizona, who made sure that immigration was handled at his local level, and he wanted to enforce federal immigration laws as a sheriff. And that dude was gangster. He'd be arresting people if he could.
It's really interesting because if you look at the ICE raids that go on in Florida, or for instance, the immigration raid in Colorado Springs, when local municipalities and the state are in coordination with ICE, we see a lot less problems than when the state and the cities are not in coordination with ICE by their own choice. And so we don't see nearly as many problems with these raids in places like Florida, in places with Republican-controlled municipalities and Republican states. We're seeing these issues in places like Los Angeles and Chicago, where their mayors and the state government refuses to coordinate with the federal government to perform these quote-unquote raids.
And we were talking about unity with the left. This is actually another issue that I found unity with the left is the immigration issue. So Mayor Adams is on his way out in New York City. And I think the big reason for that is because he was a sanctuary city. The rhetoric was really sexy when the problem wasn't at his footstep. And then they started seeing tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of illegals, and native New Yorkers were seeing fellow American citizens sleeping on the streets while Venezuelan illegals were staying at these high-rise luxury hotels and apartments. And so former liberals were starting to sound a little conservative and starting to say, hey, mayor, like, this is not right, because the proof is in the pudding. They did not like the rotten fruit that liberalism was bearing. It might have sounded cool in their college class or on Facebook, but when they actually had to face it day in and day out, they were not in support of sanctuary cities. And so now you have a contingent, I would argue, I don't know if you would agree with this, of former or maybe current self-ascribed liberals who do not want sanctuary cities.
I don't know as though that is 100% the truth in New York City. And I believe that Mamdani has a really good chance of winning the mayoral race in New York City, which will be the most socialistic mayor and socialistic politician we have ever seen in the United States. If Mamdani wins that election, New York City is done for. Many of the more centrist Democrats and the Republicans have left New York City. And so it's going to be a very tough mayoral election in New York City, and you're going to end up most likely with somebody worse than Adams. Trump was pushing the Republican candidate to withdraw to put the independent, who is, what's his face?
Bloomberg?
No, not Bloomberg. Anyways,
popular politician.
Put the independent in a position where the independent may be successful. And I haven't followed the New York City mayoral race too closely, but I don't know as though that is 100% accurate in the way that New York City has gone about their distrust in the mayor, because you have a huge contingent that the mayor didn't go progressive enough, and those are the ones that are looking towards somebody like Mamdani to solve the affordability crisis that's taking place in New York City.
Yeah, and that rabbit hole was immigration. But going back kind of to Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Israel issue, there was something I wanted to bring up. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has wind to her back because of the Charlie Kirk assassination, specifically the information that's been getting released on the internet as of recent. And one piece of digital data that just came out was a text message thread between Charlie Kirk and one of his TPUSA coordinators or executives. And this was a text message in the context of this was Charlie Kirk planning for his TPUSA event this summer and getting pressure from his Israeli Zionist Jewish billionaires that financed Turning Point USA. In the text message, and maybe if Jason's able to do this, I don't know, but there's this text where Charlie says, just lost another huge Jewish donor, $2 million a year because we won't cancel Tucker. I'm thinking of inviting Jason Lupo. No, just kidding. I'm thinking of inviting Candace. And then the other person responds, ugh. Then Charlie Kirk replies, Jewish donors play into all the stereotypes. I cannot and will not be bullied like this, leaving me no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause. 48 hours later, he was murdered on a Utah college campus. I'm not necessarily overtly suggesting correlation, but I'll let you decide for yourself. He was clearly moving away from the pro-Israel position. And as we all know, in establishment conservative circles in this country, up until probably a couple of weeks ago, this was a stronghold for Israel. Israel understood that their strength came from the evangelical Christian and conservative support in the United States, with this biblical understanding of Israel and this kind of nationalistic political understanding that they're our greatest ally. Well, that's starting to change. And if you look at any of these TikToks that are coming out by these, what they call groypers, people that listen to Nick Fuentes, people that were awakened by Charlie Kirk and TPUSA, I'm talking 22, 23, 24-year-old men are coming out and saying, we don't buy any of this. We don't think we should have a foreign nation telling our, paying off 98% of our Congress. We shouldn't have 3.8 billion annually appropriated to a foreign nation who gives us nothing in return. Our military should not fight for their wars. We're done. And so we're witnessing, whether you agree or disagree, we're witnessing a shift in conservative politics unlike we've ever seen before, because as far as I've been alive, it's been pro-Israel until you're blue in the face.
Yeah, and I think that in many ways, shapes, and forms, we try to paint the Israel-Palestine issue as a black and white issue. And I think it's become more in black and white in the U.S., but at the same time, I think that when you take some of the religious stuff aside, there's still a small argument to be made with Israel's right to defend its borders. Now, with that being said, the way that they've chosen to do that and the amount of innocent lives lost in this war in Palestine is atrocious.
Absolutely.
And so there's definitely a small argument to be made that Israel does have a right to defend its nation, sure, and I'll give them that, but do it in the right way. And there's elements at the beginning of the war that took place that probably have a little bit more backing in terms of, like, you can look at it and go, okay, like, Israel, you're riding a really fine line, but what you did can be justified. But as the war continued, there's no justification for a lot of what has taken place.
Wow. That's Jason Lupa, ladies and gentlemen. What, 6 months ago you were on the other side of that?
This war's been going on for 2 years,
sure,
right? And there's an element to where at the beginning of the war, when they were attacking, let's say, the hospital, and there was known intelligence that Hamas was hiding underneath the hospital, or they were hiding, equipment underneath the hospital or the schools, and they were warning them before they bombed. I think there was a lot to go, okay, you have some justification for your actions. But as this war has trailed on, the amount of justification that you can possibly give Israel is diminishing.
Absolutely.
And it's diminishing in rapid amounts.
And our patience is running very thin right now.
Yeah, I praise Donald Trump for getting a peace deal at the present moment. I don't want this to go to the wayside, be buried up until the point that there's another war taking place in the Middle East, and then we bring this back up. We can't let this topic die with the peace deal. And I think that's the problem with so many of these peace deals is Israel kind of fades back off into the darkness, has control over U.S. elections, has control over U.S. politics, and everybody stops talking about it, and they're this, like, man behind the curtain directing everything that's taking place in the United States, and this conversation will not re-arise until there's another war that takes place. That can't happen. This conversation of Israeli involvement in the U.S. government has to continue, even though there's a peace deal.
Well, there's also this rising, call it conspiracy theory, since that's such an derogatory phrase, that Israel was responsible for Charlie's assassination, whether it was Mossad. There's Stu Peters has a video out that's been viewed tens of millions of times, showing in frame by frame that his lavalier mic was likely a detonator and that it was detonated by one of the security detail. Take a look at it. I haven't done a deep dive. There's obviously people out on the internet that have taken this a lot further and have done a lot deeper research than we have here on this show. I'm just taking this opportunity to say that I'm acknowledging that there's a faction of the internet that's highly suspicious of Israel's involvement in Charlie Kirk's assassination. And if you know anything about Americans, we like justice and we like to find out who's responsible. And if this sentiment continues, I think it's going to counter maybe your theory, because your theory is this may die off, we'll go back to business as usual. I'm just kind of injecting this element into the conversation because I think this element could prevent that from happening because Charlie Kirk was so loved and so respected. And I don't think the American people are just going to be like, we don't care that we never found out who killed Charlie Kirk. We don't care. I think people do care. I think people want justice for Charlie.
I think that the news cycle is so fragile in terms of like, go back to Epstein for a second.
Yes, thank you.
Charlie Kirk dies and Epstein is gone.
Yeah,
like Epstein has the conversation on the Epstein files is like off in the wayside, and then Charlie Kirk dies and the conversation is dwindling because we have a government shutdown.
Well, do you want to
right?
talk about? Yeah.
Like you brought up the issues with the ICE immigration raids, but that's such old news. Like we were talking about that before the Epstein stuff. And so we're talking about that, then the Epstein stuff hits. Epstein gets a ton of flair, and then all of a sudden, Charlie Kirk's assassinated, and we forget about Epstein. Now there's a federal budget crisis and a shutdown. And don't worry, that's not going to last long because now we're talking about a peace deal in Israel. And so, and don't forget that in the whole midst of it, RFK Jr. and Donald Trump have shut down a conversation on vaccines involvement in autism. And I'm at the point where I'm saying, like, this is a scapegoat for vaccines. Tylenol is a scapegoat for vaccines. Does that mean that Tylenol is perfectly healthy for pregnant women and children? Probably not, right? Like, I'll give you that. It's probably not the safest choice. If you can avoid taking it, you probably should. But that does not mean that vaccines are in no way, shape, or form involved in autism rates spiking in the United States. And it's nothing but a scapegoat.
And this conversation is literally indicative of the news cycle because I want to jump back to Epstein. You're talking about vaccines.
Because Marjorie Taylor Greene did have a lot to say about Epstein as well. Go for it.
Yeah, as October 25, MTG has been a prominent and vocal figure for the release of the Epstein files. She pledged to name names. September 2025 press conference with Epstein survivors. Greene stated her willingness to read the names of alleged accomplices on the House floor if a list is provided to her. That would give her constitutional immunity from slander charges for her words. She was one of the few Republicans to sign a bipartisan discharge petition in September of 25 aimed at forcing a vote on legislation to compel the Department of Justice to release all files related to Epstein. Greene has challenged both her party and the White House on the Epstein files, describing her support for the discharge petition as an act of transparency rather than disloyalty. The Trump administration has applied pressure to her, calling the push for the files a hostile act and it's a hoax. And Greene said she felt more pressure over the issue than any other during her time in Congress. So MTG's gangster is all hell, Jason. I mean, this woman is unafraid, like, of anything except for maybe Almighty God. In July 2025, after a memo was issued stating there was no official client list, Greene was skeptical, arguing that information was likely hidden or destroyed. She stated that the case should not be closed and that the Justice Department and the FBI needed to provide more answers. And she also kind of echoed what I was saying earlier about bipartisan support and opportunity for unity, that this issue should transcend politics and unite conservatives and liberals, citing the black and white nature of the alleged crimes. And that's actually another point of agreement with the left, not just the ICE raids, not just the FARA, but also the Epstein list. The liberals want the Epstein list released. Marjorie Taylor Greene wants the list released. If we can come together and apply pressure as we the people, think about the implications of releasing that list.
I just want to know, like, how how stupid these people think that the American public is, because how do you uh, not only indict but find guilty Maxwell for all these crimes, and yet, well, Epstein wasn't involved. Like, there was no client list. No, there was not. There was no underage girls. Like, but then if that's the case, if that's 100% the case, then Maxwell should be a free woman, right?
It can't have it both ways.
You can't have it both ways. Either Epstein was involved or Maxwell is innocent. Those are like you cannot have both take place at once. And so the American people should be looking at this and going like, okay, which one is right, which one is wrong, because one of them has to be wrong. They can't exist and have one of them be right and one of them be wrong. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and I brought up President Kennedy earlier. He had passed an executive order, I think it was, to enforce Israel to register under the FARA law. He was murdered. Charlie Kirk sent a text message saying he's abandoning the pro-Israel cause. He was murdered 48 hours later. Marjorie Taylor Greene has recently stated her concerns about her personal safety, posting on social media that if something were to happen to her, a foreign government or, quote, powerful people should be investigated. So my question is, why does Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's probably gone to war over every major controversial issue imaginable, is stating that this issue, which is bucking the conservatives, the MAGA contingent in Congress, has caused her more pressure than any other issue in her time in Congress? I find that interesting, don't you?
Yeah, this is like I keep saying, this is one of the most interesting times to be alive, because regardless of whether or not you agree with President Trump 100%, there's a lot that's coming to the fruition because of Trump.
Yeah.
And Trump is allowing these issues to come to the forefront. And so while we might not always agree with how he handles things or what's taking place or how it's taking place, we do have to give him credit, because there's no way that we would be having any of these conversations if Kamala Harris was in office.
Mamala? Remember they wanted to call her Mamala?
Yeah.
I think it was the E.T. star, the girl that was abused by Steven Spielberg. She wanted to call him Mamala.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you have anything else, Aaron?
Jesus is king. Christ is king. That's all I got to say.
Amen. And the Jewish people deserve Jesus Christ as their Messiah as well.
Jesus Christ is king over the whole world, including Israel and the Jewish people. All glory to be to God.
Amen. This is Spiritual Uncertainty. Join us online, YouTube, and Rumble. Have a great day. God bless.
Peace, peace, peace.